Generation X, roughly between 1965 and 1976, so they're just about 30 to 30s.
Yep. Gen X is very interesting because they were initially called the slackers, and it was thought that...
The slackers.
Yeah, the slackers. In fact, there was a book...
Probably by the baby boomers, the veterans.
Yeah, probably the veterans and the baby boomers. They grew up in a very interesting time because these were the latchkey kids. These were the kids whose parents went off to work, and these were kids that were not the center of attention, unlike some of the boomers who were in their families. But this is the group that they were left pretty much on their own, and consequently they grew up basically being able to function pretty independently, not necessarily by choice, but by the reality. This is also the group, Steve, that saw a lot of turmoil in the workplace. This is the group that saw their parents laid off.
Ooh,
the baby boomers didn't experience that. The veterans grew up in a different time. But the Gen X kids, they grew up and they saw their parents, they saw massive
Is this where loyalty started to kind of detach itself a little bit?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I think so.
Okay, and how about the fourth group is Generation Y or Millennials, 1977 to 1999. I guess they're 8-year-olds in the workplace, but 1999.
Not all of them are in the workplace right now. They're the ones that are coming into the workplace, and they are very interesting, and they're getting a lot of attention. And the reason being is how they grew up and their values are a little bit different. For example, with a lot of, and I'm speaking very generally now, but the millennials, the 20-somethings, they grew up being the center of attention. These kids grew up where the world focused around them. They grew up being very, very highly scheduled. So it's not atypical for one of the millennials to have grown up where they went to school, then after school they had a club, then after that they have dance lessons, and after that they grew up in very highly scheduled, pretty protective environments. These were the kids who grew up wearing bike helmets. Boomers, our bike helmets were our heads, okay? But the millennials who grew up pretty protected, very scheduled, parents very, very directly involved. They also grew up with the value of diversity not being anything unusual. It was a fact of life. And they grew up with people who were very much caring, on the lookout for them, protective, help them move from one thing to another. This is the term helicopter parents, parents who hover over their kids, even after they go to college. This is where that term came up while this group was growing up.
Okay, so now let's cycle through the four groups again and talk about what a candidate could expect to get from that interviewer.
Sure.
So let's start with the veterans. A veteran's interviewing you.
Okay.
Do they wear a combat helmet?
No, and again, we're speaking kind of generally.
I know, generally, right.
But I think the veterans are the people who will tend to value people being very respectful. So if I was interviewing with a veteran, I would refer to Mr. So-and-so unless they gave me permission to be more informal. I would look at using stories during the interview that would indicate, if I were an applicant, how I stuck with something when times were tough. For example, how I put in extra effort, how I valued the company. I would talk about times or give examples of time when I went the extra mile and again stayed with the company when things were tough. This is a group where you can say, I worked 20 years for the same company and I'm proud of it, and they would understand and empathize with that.
Okay. All right, let's go to the baby boomers now. I guess you wouldn't give them a Jimi Hendrix record during the interview.
No, probably not.
And so what do you do with them?
The baby boomers were people who actually, when they came into the workforce, worked extremely hard. Also, this is a group that really values teamwork. And working together. And so one of the things that I would look at is, similar to the veterans, I would talk about or use stories about when I went above and beyond to accomplish a goal. This is a group that values the people who came in early, stayed late, stuck through, made some real sacrifices. This is also the group that I would talk about examples of teamwork and how I work together as part of a team. You can even, as interviewing with a boomer, talk about how you managed tough interpersonal situations at work, or how you maneuvered yourself through a system. This is probably the most political group.
So social skills.
Yeah.
Are important.
So the social skills would be very important.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Let's go with Gen X. Now you're being, interviewed.
Okay. By a Gen X.
Yes.
Yeah. With the Gen X, I would talk about how I was able to work very well, both in a team but independently, and would not need very much close supervision at all, because the way I like to work is you give me the job, you tell me what you want, and let me run with it, and I will perform, and I will get you what you need, in that job to get accomplished. But this is the group that does not want to be micromanaged, probably almost of all the group. But Gen Xers value independence. They're flexible. So the kinds of things that I would talk about is how you're able to move from one thing to another, how you're very flexible, how you need minimal supervision, and also the teamwork. The teamwork is a theme, I think, with most generations. So giving examples of how you worked very effectively in a team.
Okay. And then the millennials, Generation Y.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've heard
You're being
it. I don't know.
Interviewed by a 27-year-old.
Interesting. I heard the millennials, the 20-somethings, they like to be referred to as the millennials, but other people refer to them as Gen Y.
Okay.
This is a group that is going to be coming into the workforce now, and it's estimated their numbers will be equal to or greater than the boomers. This is a very large group coming into the workplace. And it's causing some concern because they're coming in a little bit differently. This is a group that is probably the most technically savvy. This is a group that is very skilled and knows how to get information. Where they may struggle sometimes is in difficult interpersonal situations. Okay. This is seen as one of the most resourceful and smartest. Diversity is not an issue. They have no issues with diversity, where the veterans may have had some. Excuse me. And the other thing with millennials, if you were interviewing with a millennial, and here's how you might interview with a millennial. In a lot of the interviewing situations that are going on now, if you're going in and as a manager, the millennials, who would be your direct reports, would want to meet their manager, and they would want to interview the manager. They want to be directly involved.
Okay.
So if you were going in as a potential manager of a millennial, the things that I would emphasize is your mentoring ability, your ability to guide and develop people, to teach them. One of the interesting things about the millennials, they're lifelong learners. Learning is part of who they are. They're always looking to get new information, new knowledge. So if I were going in as a manager, and they were interviewing me as a prospective manager, I would talk about mentoring, providing a path to guide their careers. I would talk about being available. I would talk with them about what their career goals were, and ask a lot of questions around that, and look at how I might be helping them move their careers forward. Now, if I was going in as a peer, what I would probably emphasize is my ability to work very well as a team member, and I would also emphasize my technical strengths.
Now, we can't spend as much time doing this, but I'm curious the opposite. Like as a manager, interviewing people of different generations. Do you have any suggestions for if there's a manager watching thinking, okay, when the shoe's on the other foot, I'm interviewing a Gen Y or Gen X or whatever, and how to get at whether they can fit in with the team or not? Do you have any general...
I think one of the things that I would look for as a manager interviewing people of different generations, a couple of things that I would look for is how well they worked in a team. I would also look for how well they were able to multitask, because today's jobs are such that nobody does one thing only. So I would look for I would ask some questions around multitasking. I would pose some questions about how they deal with conflict.
Okay.
Because I think the millennials sometimes may struggle a little bit more with conflict than some of the others. I think the baby boomers perhaps deal a little bit better with that or know how to work through that. I would also ask about how comfortable they felt, and I would ask some questions about how they felt working with very different generations. And in today's workforce, where the first time you may have 4 different generations working together on the same team.
People aren't retiring quite as quickly, right?
No, that's the other thing. The Gen Xers are really annoyed with the boomers because we're not moving fast enough. Not enough of us are retiring. And so I would look for things like how they worked in the team, how they like to communicate, and find out how they like to communicate and the way they were comfortable communicating. So, for examples, I think boomers are very comfortable communicating one-on-one in person. Gen X and Gen Y may have a greater comfort with communicating via email and electronically.